The stars outside the observation deck shimmered like scattered diamonds across the endless black, yet none of their brilliance compared to the sight of the planet below. Zithra hung in orbit like a jewel, oceans swirling with teal light, landmasses glowing faintly from the bioluminescent forests. Captain Elias Vance had never seen anything so alive in his life, and for a soldier trained to focus only on orders, the beauty struck him with a force he could not ignore. He leaned over the railing, the hum of the capital ship beneath his feet vibrating softly, and felt an unfamiliar stir in his chest. The mission was simple in theory: infiltrate, observe, and if necessary, eliminate the target. The target was the Empress Thalira, known across human space as the Queen of Nothing, a ruler whose name inspired fear, awe, and whispered legends. Yet as Elias gazed down at her domain, he found himself questioning everything he had been told about the so-called tyrant. Elias had trained for this moment for years. Every detail of his infiltration had been studied, memorized, and drilled. His ship had merged seamlessly with the alien fleet approaching Zithra, mimicking their transmissions and avoiding scrutiny. He had navigated through sensor arrays that would have caught any ordinary operative. Every decision had been calculated. And yet, in the quiet moments before he entered the palace, hesitation gripped him. He was a human, alone in a world that saw his species as fragile, unpredictable, and often inferior. But there was something in that unpredictability, a spark that the aliens could never truly anticipate. The palace itself was a monument to intellect and precision. Its towers spiraled upward like crystalline trees, their surfaces catching the distant light of Zithra's twin moons. As Elias approached through the shadows of the lower gardens, he observed the courtiers moving with a grace that was almost impossible to mimic. Every gesture, every tilt of the head seemed perfectly measured. He realized immediately that Thalira's empire was not built solely on force. It was built on knowledge, order, and a sense of aesthetics that human minds could barely comprehend. Yet in that order, Elias also noticed what was not present: fear. Even her guards, armed and formidable, moved with loyalty that seemed born of respect rather than coercion. That, he realized, was a danger far greater than any weapon. Elias' first encounter with the Empress was not planned. He had been observing from a distance, watching her preside over a council of advisors in a chamber made entirely of reflective crystal, when she noticed him. It was a simple glance, but it carried weight. Her eyes, elongated and luminous, met his through the window of observation. Elias froze, unsure if she had detected him, yet he sensed in that instant a curiosity rather than alarm. It unsettled him. Humans were trained to face fear, to recognize threat, yet here was a being who made him feel both insignificant and vital at the same time. He moved carefully, blending into the palace corridors, his uniform hidden beneath the robes provided by the intelligence division. Each step echoed slightly, and each shadow seemed to hold 1,000 eyes. Yet the corridors were empty, eerily silent except for the soft hum of the palace's life support systems. He studied the architecture as he moved, how doors opened before he reached them, how light reflected across surfaces in subtle patterns. This was a civilization that had mastered environment as much as technology. Elias felt the thrill of the hunt, but also a deeper, unexpected sensation: admiration. It was dangerous to admire the enemy, especially when the orders were to destroy her, yet he could not help himself. In a grand chamber at the heart of the palace, Thalira awaited. Elias entered silently, careful not to disturb the arrangement of the room, the delicate balance of her world. She rose as he stepped in, her presence commanding without a word. The Empress was taller than any human, her posture perfect, her movement fluid like water over stone. She wore a gown that shimmered faintly with a living fabric, a subtle reflection of Zithra's light, and her eyes glowed softly, holding centuries of knowledge within them. For the first time, Elias felt truly small, not in fear but in awe. He raised his hands slightly, as a gesture of surrender and respect, though he knew it could be misread. Thalira's lips curved into a faint smile, almost imperceptible, and that tiny motion sent a shock through him. She spoke, her voice melodic yet firm, and Elias realized that she had anticipated his arrival down to the precise second. "You are human," she said, her gaze sharp, analyzing, "and you are here for me." Elias nodded, words caught in his throat. Everything he had rehearsed dissolved under the weight of her presence. "Yes," he said finally, voice steady despite the tumult inside. That is my mission. She tilted her head slightly, not in judgment but in intrigue. You are honest, she observed. Most humans are not. Elias felt an unexpected pull of amusement, even respect. Here was a being whose mind could pierce through layers of deception, yet she chose to converse rather than strike. Perhaps, he said carefully, you underestimate us. She studied him for a long moment. Perhaps, she repeated softly, almost to herself. Or perhaps I understand too well. The conversation that followed was brief, yet loaded with tension. Elias could see the strategy in her words, the intelligence in her pauses. She spoke of her empire, of the burdens of leadership, and of the fragility of order. Elias responded cautiously, careful not to reveal too much, yet he found himself drawn into her reasoning, unable to resist engaging. They danced verbally, each testing the other, each measuring the limits of the other's mind. And in that space, Elias realized something dangerous. He was not just observing history, he was part of it. As the hours passed, the palace seemed to breathe around them. Thalira led him through halls lined with intricate carvings that depicted the rise of her civilization. Elias noted how even their history celebrated not only victories, but moments of cooperation, ingenuity, and sacrifice. Humans had never been allowed such intimate knowledge of alien culture, and yet here he was, granted passage by the very person he was sent to destroy. It was disorienting, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. He began to question what destruction truly meant. Could a mission be fulfilled if the target inspired understanding rather than hatred? Could orders account for admiration, empathy, or, he dared not admit it, even the first flickers of affection? The night deepened outside, and the twin moons of Zithra cast long shadows across the crystalline floors. Elias and Thalira paused in a chamber overlooking the city, the lights below twinkling like a living constellation. He noticed how she moved, the subtle grace in each step, the way her eyes reflected both authority and loneliness. It struck him that she was more human than the humans he knew, capable of fear, desire, ambition, and doubt. And in that realization, the weight of his mission grew heavier. How could he strike someone so remarkable, someone whose strength and vulnerability existed side by side? Suddenly, the soft alarms of the palace stirred him. Sensors had detected movement in the outer corridors, other humans, operatives from his own fleet, seeking to carry out their own interpretations of the mission. Elias recognized the danger immediately. He had a choice: act, flee, or continue observing. Each choice carried consequences far beyond his own survival. Thalira, noticing his tension, smiled faintly again, as if reading the very thoughts he could not speak. "You hesitate," she said quietly. "That is your strength." It was an observation, not a judgment, and yet it resonated with him more than any command ever had. Humans hesitated not out of fear, but out of calculation, empathy, and the ability to imagine the outcomes beyond simple logic. In that moment, Elias understood that the aliens, brilliant as they were, had underestimated the core of human potential: imagination, moral reasoning, and emotional intelligence. That realization was both a weapon and a burden. It made the mission more complex, and yet infinitely more meaningful. Elias made his decision. He lowered his weapon, keeping his body ready but his mind open. Thalira's gaze met his, and for a fleeting moment there was a mutual recognition, not of species nor of mission, but of something greater: respect, understanding. The silent acknowledgement that the future was not yet written, and that in this encounter humans were more than they were ever expected to be. They moved together toward the inner halls, cautious yet deliberate. Each step was laden with possibility. Elias understood that nothing would ever be the same after this night. His mission had begun, yet its outcome was uncertain, shaped by the very qualities that humans were told made them weak: courage, creativity, and the refusal to follow orders blindly. These were the weapons he had, the tools that might redefine not only his life, but the fate of an entire empire. And somewhere deep within him, beneath the training, the fear, and the orders, a spark of something new began to grow: curiosity, admiration, perhaps even something like hope. As the first moonlight reflected across Thalira's crystalline robes, Elias realized the truth. The mission to destroy her might never be completed, because the human heart could not simply follow orders. It had to choose, and choice was power. In that quiet understanding, he felt both the weight of responsibility and the exhilaration of possibility. Zithra waited below, alive, magnificent, and indifferent to the struggles of one human and one alien. And yet, within its orbit, history was beginning to bend, shaped by the unpredictable, uncalculable force that humans represented. For the first time in his life, Captain Elias Vance felt fully alive, not as a soldier, not as an operative, not as a weapon, but as a human, capable of choices, capable of change, and capable of challenging the very foundations of an empire that believed itself untouchable. And in the shadows of Thalira's palace, the Queen of Nothing awaited not a murderer, but a partner in the story that was about to unfold, a story that neither of them could have predicted, and one that would mark the beginning of something no strategy, no order, and no logic could ever control. The undercity of Zithra was unlike anything Elias had imagined. Beneath the gleaming towers of the capital, vast chambers stretched into shadows, illuminated only by faint bioluminescent strips embedded in the walls. The air was thick with the hum of life support and distant machinery, carrying a faint metallic scent that reminded him that this was no natural place. Yet amid the dim light and echoing corridors, life thrived. Small markets of alien merchants had taken root, delicate lights reflected on their scales and shimmering garments, and Elias could see children darting through narrow pathways, their laughter echoing in ways that reminded him of home. It was a world hidden beneath the perfection of the Empress's palace, a world that few outsiders ever glimpsed. And now, he and Thalira were moving through it, side by side, pursued by human assassins who would kill without hesitation. Elias kept his hand near the concealed weapon at his hip, though he knew it would not be enough. These operatives were trained like him, ruthless and precise. But unlike him, they lacked his capacity for improvisation, the quality that had kept him alive so far. It was not just strength that would save them. It was ingenuity, adaptability, and the human instinct to act beyond logic. He could feel it now, the edge that humans carried, the unpredictable spark that no alien, no matter how intelligent, could calculate. He glanced at Thalira, whose luminous eyes scanned the shadows with grace and intelligence, noting the subtle shifts of the environment, the tiniest signs of danger. Even in this unfamiliar setting, she moved with the poise of a ruler, every step deliberate, every motion filled with intent. "You rely too much on your weapon," she said softly, her voice a whisper meant only for him, yet carrying the authority of command. "The humans I have encountered are clever, yes, but they also think they can solve everything with fire and steel. You must learn to see beyond it." Elias suppressed a smile. He had spent a lifetime relying on fire and steel, yet here she was, an alien queen, teaching him something he already knew in theory but had never truly mastered in practice. "And you rely too much on predictability," he replied. "That is your strength and your weakness." Thalira tilted her head slightly, considering his words. There was no judgment in her gaze, only curiosity and perhaps a hint of respect. "Perhaps," she murmured, "but even the unpredictable can be guided, shaped, contained." They moved in silence for a time, the sounds of the undercity growing around them. Alien voices, clanging machinery, and distant echoes of activity surrounded them like a living organism. Elias had to trust not only his instincts but hers, and in that trust he felt the first stirrings of something he had never allowed himself: reliance. He had never relied on anyone, never allowed the human connections he had known to grow deep. Yet here, in the shadow of an alien empire, he realized that collaboration, truly mutual collaboration, was the weapon he had never trained for but now needed most. As they turned a corner, a group of figures emerged from the shadows. Elias recognized them immediately, fellow humans, armed and determined, faces set with the certainty of their mission. They did not hesitate, their weapons raised in unison. Elias' pulse quickened, yet he remained calm. Every move mattered now. He had to protect not only himself, but the Empress whose survival had become essential to the balance of life on this planet. In that instant, the lines between duty and morality blurred. Killing her was no longer the priority. Keeping her alive, preserving the fragile alliance had become paramount. Thalira stepped forward, her hands raised, not in surrender but in calculated authority. Her voice, amplified by subtle alien technology, carried across the corridor with clarity and resonance. "You are misguided," she said. "The target is not the enemy. Your understanding is incomplete." The human operatives hesitated, glancing at each other, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Elias saw the opening. Using every instinct honed through years of survival and combat, he maneuvered, creating small diversions, exploiting their reliance on standard tactics. He moved through the shadows, striking not with violence but with strategy, disarming, distracting, and outmaneuvering the attackers without firing a single shot. The human advantage lay not in brute force, but in thinking beyond what the others expected. In that chaotic moment, Elias realized that humans were a force precisely because they could act unpredictably, guided by reasoning that no alien or protocol could anticipate. The attackers were forced back, retreating into the shadows from which they had come, and Elias breathed a silent sigh of relief. Thalira's gaze met his, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Impressive," she said. "You are resourceful." Elias allowed himself a small, tired grin. "Resourceful enough to survive another day," he replied. The gravity of their situation, however, was not diminished. The rogue faction would not give up so easily, and the Undercity offered both refuge and danger in equal measure. Every step forward required caution, every decision carried weight, and every choice could mean life or death. They continued deeper into the labyrinth, moving with purpose. Along the way, Elias observed more of the Undercity. Alien engineers tinkering with machines beyond his comprehension, children learning from holographic instructors, and markets where delicate fabrics and glowing fruits were traded with care. It was a society vibrant, complex, and resilient, thriving in spaces humans rarely considered. And yet, it was a society threatened, not by internal decay, but by those who underestimated the power of human unpredictability. Elias understood now that his presence and his decisions would influence outcomes far beyond this single mission. The survival of an empire rested on qualities humans were often told they lacked: empathy, courage, and the ability to adapt. Thalira led him into a chamber hidden beneath the main corridors. Here, walls of crystal reflected the faint bioluminescent light, creating a kaleidoscope effect that made the space feel alive. She gestured for him to sit, and he noticed how she herself did not sit but remained poised, alert to every movement, every sound. Elias felt a strange sense of awe. This was power in its purest form, not aggression, not fear, but presence, intelligence, and control. And now humans were entangled in it, not as conquerors, but as partners in survival. "Why do you help me?" Thalira asked quietly, finally breaking the silence. Her tone was calm, yet there was curiosity beneath it, as if she could not comprehend fully why a human, trained to eliminate her, would now protect her. Elias considered his answer carefully, aware that honesty was both a weapon and a vulnerability. "Because you are not what I was told," he said simply, "and because humans, we survive by thinking, by understanding, by adapting. Killing you would not make me stronger, protecting you does." She regarded him for a long moment, eyes reflecting the complexity of her thoughts. "Humans are strange creatures," she observed. "Weak yet strong, small yet capable of shifting entire worlds. I have studied your kind, yet I understand only fragments." Elias nodded. "We are fragments," he said, "but the pieces, when placed right, they can change everything." They spent hours in that hidden chamber, speaking quietly of strategy, of survival, and of the fragile alliances that now bound them together. Elias shared what he knew of the human fleet, their tactics, and their weaknesses. Thalira, in turn, revealed aspects of her empire that had never been disclosed to outsiders. The intricate political webs, the factions seeking to destabilize her rule, and the unspoken fears that even a ruler as powerful as she carried within her. Elias listened, absorbing every detail, recognizing the human advantage once more. The capacity to synthesize information, to anticipate outcomes, and to act creatively under pressure. As dawn approached in the upper city, the first streaks of alien sunlight filtered through cracks in the Undercity's walls. Elias felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. They had survived the night, navigated dangers both human and alien, and emerged with a tentative alliance stronger than either could have predicted. Yet the danger was far from over. The rogue faction would regroup, their determination undiminished. And somewhere in the shadows, other humans might still act on orders that ignored the reality Elias now understood. That survival depended not on blind obedience, but on reasoning, empathy, and courage, the very qualities that made humans remarkable. Thalira approached him, her presence as commanding as it had been when they first met. She extended a hand, not as an order, but as a gesture of trust. Elias took it, feeling the weight of choice once again. Here in the depths of the Undercity, humans and aliens had formed a bond that neither protocol nor tradition could dictate. It was fragile, yes, but it was real. And it was powerful. "You have taught me something," Thalira said softly. "That strength is not always in perfection. Sometimes it is in the unexpected, in the unpredictable, in courage, in choice." Elias met her gaze, recognizing the truth in her words. Humans had always been underestimated, often dismissed as fragile or impulsive. Yet here in the heart of an alien empire, their unpredictability had become a shield, a weapon, and a bridge. "And you've shown me," he replied, "that power is not in fear but in understanding." For a brief moment, silence enveloped them, filled only by the faint hum of machinery and the distant stirrings of the Undercity. Elias realized that the next steps would be critical. The rogue faction would return, more dangerous than ever. Every decision, every alliance, and every choice would shape not only the outcome of this conflict, but the future of human-alien relations in ways that no one could fully predict. And yet, for the first time, he felt a quiet confidence. Humans had endured far greater dangers, and it was their ingenuity, adaptability, and courage that would see them through. The Undercity stretched endlessly, a maze of potential dangers and opportunities. Elias and Thalira moved forward together, not as hunter and target, but as partners navigating a world that neither fully controlled. And as the first light of Zithra's sun touched the edges of crystal towers above, Elias felt the unmistakable stirrings of hope. He had survived the first night, and in doing so had glimpsed something extraordinary. That humans, underestimated as they were, could change the course of empires through intellect, courage, and the strength to choose differently. And somewhere deep within the shadowed alleys of the Undercity, the rogue faction watched, plotting their next move. They did not yet understand that the human advantage was not merely in strength or skill, but in the qualities that no calculations, no weapon, and no strategy could predict: imagination, empathy, and the unyielding will to survive and to shape the future. The Undercity had grown. Quieter as the hours passed, though Elias knew the calm was temporary. Somewhere in the twisting corridors and hidden chambers, the rogue faction gathered, preparing their next move. Every human operative in the fleet had been trained for this mission, yet none possessed the adaptability or intuition that Elias brought to the situation. That unpredictability was now the greatest weapon in their shared arsenal. Thalira moved alongside him, her luminous eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, as though the city itself whispered secrets only she could hear. Elias understood that she was not merely observing the environment. She was calculating possibilities, predicting moves, and weighing choices. But even she could not anticipate the chaos that humans could bring, the brilliance of improvisation when logic alone failed. They arrived at a junction where several narrow tunnels converged. From this vantage point, Elias could see faint movements in the distance, figures shifting with purpose, weapons glinting faintly under the bioluminescent lights. It was the rogue faction, advancing toward the chamber where countless innocents had already sought refuge. He clenched his fists, feeling the familiar surge of focus. This was the moment where human ingenuity would be tested, not in isolation, not through force alone, but through strategy, improvisation, and courage. "Listen," he whispered to Thalira, pointing to the converging tunnels. "They will come through multiple routes. If we control the intersections, we can funnel them where we want. Use the environment, not just your guards." Thalira's gaze softened slightly, acknowledging both his insight and the strange satisfaction it brought her. "Humans are clever in ways I cannot always predict," she said. "I have underestimated you, Captain Elias. Perhaps I have underestimated your kind." He offered a faint smile, knowing she meant it in more ways than one. "It's not about underestimating," he replied. "It's about seeing what others can't. That's how we survive." They moved quickly, setting subtle traps and creating diversions, using debris, light patterns, and even alien machinery in ways the rogue faction could not anticipate. It was an improvised battlefield, a test of minds as much as of strength. Elias coordinated silently, signaling Thalira and guiding the few loyal guards who remained with them. Every human advantage, adaptability, moral reasoning, unpredictability, was leveraged to its fullest. He watched as the attackers entered the tunnels, expecting easy victory, only to encounter a series of challenges that forced them to split, slow down, and rethink their approach. The chaos favored the defenders, and Ilias felt the thrill of strategy at work, the exhilaration of humans finally proving themselves in a domain they were told they could never influence. Thalira observed him as much as she observed the intruders. She noted his focus, his calm under pressure, and the way he anticipated moves before they occurred. He was not merely surviving, he was guiding outcomes in a manner no protocol or calculation could predict. That unpredictability was what kept them alive, what allowed the Empress to maintain control even as danger pressed from all sides. Thalira realized, with a mixture of admiration and astonishment, that the human she was supposed to fear had become her greatest ally. The lesson was clear: humans were not weak. They were resourceful, clever, and capable of reasoning beyond rigid rules. And in moments of crisis, that reasoning could alter the course of entire civilizations. The battle unfolded with tense precision. The rogue faction attempted to bypass their carefully planned defenses, but Ilias and Thalira anticipated each move. He used light reflections to create illusions, guiding attackers into narrow passages where they could be contained or delayed. He exploited their reliance on standard tactics, anticipating patterns and redirecting them. Thalira, in turn, commanded her loyalists with a subtle authority, guiding reinforcements to points where the human intuition predicted vulnerability. Together, human unpredictability and alien strategy formed a combination neither side had expected. The Undercity became a theater of improvisation, where every step, every decision, and every split-second choice carried weight. Lives, the fate of the Empire, and the fragile bond between species hung in the balance. Ilias moved silently, his mind racing with calculations and possibilities. Each corridor, each shadow, each flicker of movement was analyzed, and every choice was informed not by brute force but by the capacity to think differently. He observed a group of attackers attempting to flank them through a narrow side passage. Acting instinctively, he created a diversion by manipulating a control panel, causing a section of the floor to shift and redirecting the intruders into a trap. The attackers faltered, giving Thalira's guards the advantage to subdue them. It was not the largest victory, but it demonstrated the essence of human advantage: creativity under pressure, the ability to act decisively when logic alone would not suffice. For a brief moment, Ilias allowed himself to breathe. Thalira's gaze met his across the chaos, and in that silent exchange, there was understanding, mutual respect, and the recognition that something profound was unfolding. Humans were capable of acts that could not be predicted, not by machines, not by logic, not even by centuries of alien strategy. That unpredictability, paired with courage, made them formidable. And now it was the weapon that would determine the survival of Zithra and the future of the Empress herself. The rogue faction was relentless, and yet with every failed maneuver, their confidence wavered. Ilias' interventions forced them to rethink, to hesitate, and hesitation in battle was fatal. He directed Thalira to use narrow passageways and hidden vantage points, drawing the attackers into positions where human and alien coordination could exploit them fully. The Undercity became a living chessboard, each movement calculated yet flexible, adaptive yet decisive. Thalira realized with growing amazement that Ilias' leadership relied not on authority, but on the capacity to anticipate, to adapt, and to inspire action from those around him. He was not commanding, they were cooperating, forming a partnership that blurred the lines between species, strategy, and instinct. Hours passed in tense anticipation. The final confrontation loomed as the rogue faction converged on the central chamber, a vast space where civilians and loyalists had gathered for safety. Ilias positioned himself and Thalira at the most advantageous point, leveraging every insight, every subtle observation he had made about their surroundings. They used light, shadow, and the environment itself to channel the attackers into constrained positions. Each action was precise, intentional, and unpredictable. And yet, even amid the intensity of the moment, Ilias could not ignore the strange bond forming between him and the Empress. There was admiration, trust, and perhaps something deeper, an understanding that transcended mission and species, born of shared survival and mutual recognition. The final wave of attackers pressed forward, yet Elias remained calm. He had observed their patterns, predicted their moves, and anticipated their weaknesses. Using every tool at his disposal, not just weapons, but cunning, improvisation, and empathy, he guided the outcome with subtle interventions. One group was diverted by a strategically placed barrier, another misled by a reflection of light, and the remainder confronted by combined human and alien forces operating in perfect coordination. The rogue faction faltered, their unity breaking under pressure, and Elias seized the moment. He moved swiftly, disabling key opponents, redirecting others, and ensuring the safety of civilians. Every human advantage, every intuitive decision had culminated in this decisive moment. Thalira watched, her heart quickening with both fear and awe. Elias' courage and ingenuity had turned the tide of the conflict, demonstrating qualities the aliens often dismissed as weaknesses. His unpredictability, adaptability, and empathy had become the key to their survival. She realized that the humans she had been told to underestimate were capable of feats that no alien calculation could foresee. And more than that, the human at her side, the one she had been trained to fear, was the one who had saved not only her life but the lives of countless citizens. When the battle finally ended, silence descended on the chamber. The rogue faction had been neutralized, either captured or fleeing into the labyrinthine tunnels from which they came. Civilians emerged cautiously from their hiding places, eyes wide with relief and gratitude. Elias, breathing heavily, felt a profound sense of accomplishment but also exhaustion. Every nerve, every instinct, every calculation had been tested, and yet they had prevailed. Thalira approached him, her expression unreadable for a moment, then softened. "You have changed the course of this night," she said quietly, almost reverently. "Not with weapons alone, but with courage, creativity, and choices that no one expected. Humans are more remarkable than I allowed myself to believe." Elias felt the weight of her words. They were praise, yes, but also recognition. Acknowledgement that human potential was not defined by orders, rules, or predictable logic. It was defined by the ability to act beyond expectation, to imagine possibilities, and to make choices that could alter the path of history. He realized in that moment that the mission he had been sent to fulfill had evolved into something greater. It was no longer about destruction. It was about partnership, understanding, and the forging of new possibilities. Thalira extended her hand, not as a ruler commanding obedience, but as a partner offering trust. Elias took it, feeling the weight of a connection that transcended mission and species. In that grip, there was respect, acknowledgement, and a quiet promise that the future could be shaped together. The human and the Empress, once bound by the threat of violence, were now bound by shared survival and mutual recognition. As dawn approached in the upper city, light filtered down into the undercity, revealing the aftermath of the battle. The corridors, once filled with tension and danger, now seemed quiet and almost serene. Citizens began to emerge fully, their faces showing cautious hope. Elias and Thalira stood together, surveying the result of their combined efforts. It was a testament to the unpredictability, ingenuity, and courage that humans possessed, a reminder that strength was not always found in perfection or force, but in the capacity to act, to think, and to choose in ways that others could not anticipate. In the quiet moments after the conflict, Elias allowed himself to reflect. The human advantage was clear. They could reason, adapt, empathize, and imagine. These were traits that no alien technology or strategy could predict, and in moments of crisis, they became decisive. Thalira, observing him, understood this more clearly than ever. The human beside her had proven that her empire's survival, and perhaps its future, depended not on fear or conformity, but on qualities that transcended species: intelligence, courage, empathy, and choice. Elias turned to Thalira, sensing that the bond they had formed during the night's chaos was stronger than either had expected. "We have survived," he said, voice steady but soft. "And we have shown what humans can do, not just with force, but with thought, courage, and understanding." Thalira nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Yes," she replied, "and perhaps now the galaxy will learn to see humanity differently. Not as weak, but as capable of shaping destiny in ways even the most brilliant minds cannot foresee." The Undercity, once a place of danger, now felt alive with possibility. Every corridor, every shadow, every reflective surface had played a part in the story that had unfolded. Elias and Thalira moved through it together, not as hunter and target, not as human and alien, but as partners who had discovered something extraordinary: the power of choice, the value of intelligence, and the unyielding strength of the human spirit. The first light of Zithra's sun crept across the crystalline towers above, illuminating the city in hues of teal and gold. Elias understood that the night's events had changed more than just the fate of a mission or the survival of an empire. They had changed him, and perhaps the way humans would be seen across the stars. He glanced at Thalira, sensing the depth of understanding in her eyes. Together, they had survived not because of orders, weapons, or predictions, but because of qualities that could not be calculated: courage, creativity, empathy, and the ability to choose. And in that choice lay the power to alter history itself. The story of that night would ripple across the empire and across human space. Humans, underestimated and dismissed for so long, had shown their worth in a manner that no calculation, no strategy, and no alien intellect could predict. And somewhere deep within, Elias felt a quiet certainty: this was only the beginning. The galaxy had witnessed the human spirit, and it had changed forever.